Welcome to Comsverse. This session is called The Key Steps of Implementing Microsoft Teams Direct Routing Successfully. And today we'll be presented to you by Alistair Pidd and Tara Galea. Take it away.
Thank you. Hi and welcome. But before we get started, I'd like to thank the organisers and sponsors for making this event possible. You can see them all on screen at the moment. Over the next 25 to 30 minutes, we'll cover aspects of direct routing which you should consider in order to deploy successfully. Automation, bulk scripting and management tools all play their part in a team's rollout, but it's also important to follow a good structure to your direct routing project to cover all the bases and keep everything aligned. The topics we will cover mirror some of the stages and activities carried out during pure IP direct routing rollouts. We've been providing hosted and cloud telephony solutions around the globe for 15 years, and we would like to share our experience and knowledge with you. Direct routing is the feature which Microsoft Cloud Voice Services was waiting for. Its uptake was significant and rapid when released, and whilst in the early days it had some limitations, most of those now have been developed, making it a more mature service and certainly enterprise ready, able to work for small to large businesses alike. Most companies take up direct routing for the ability to integrate their own existing telephony carriers, number ranges, and existing commercial deals for channels and minutes, but there are also options to deploy direct routing in a few different scenarios. This might be as part of a unified dial plan across multiple telephone systems, allowing teams to dial extensions and numbers on other phone systems, or may also be the ability to integrate and piggyback teams to existing systems that already have the PSTN access. Knowing the options open to you for direct routing may influence some of the targets and objectives you define for your project, either leveraging existing assets, upgrading, or unifying for a cohesive dial plan. When considering why, how, and when to integrate direct routing into your IT or cloud strategy, it's important not to overlook that it's an extension of phone system in the same way as adding external PSTN capability is to all phone systems. In building up the blocks in the design, you should consider both standard VoIP and Microsoft good practices followed when planning, designing, and implementing both these components. As with any phone system, it's important to get the core telephony settings right, with features like the routing, dial plan, emergency calling, and class of service. Phone system and direct routing features and functionality are pretty intertwined, so starting from the ground up and layering the solution is important. Some features have critical correlations and links in the deployment. Since the phone system is a VoIP and cloud-orientated solution, it's necessary to perform all the correct planning to adhere to good practice voice services, factoring important steps such as the network and connectivity path, QoS, and end-to-end security. This is standard practice for most telephony deployments and therefore shouldn't be skipped in a Teams voice with direct routing solution. So knowing that we need to factor direct routing and phone system to achieve overall success, what's the first step? The best place to start is with defining clear business and technical requirements. There are a number of different ways to design and deliver Teams voice and direct routing services, and varying objectives unique to each business. Spending the time early on to define a set of objectives will mean that you can assess and measure those throughout the project, but more importantly, guide and develop the design phase to select the appropriate deployment model, configurations, and project activities to suit. Much of the key to success with direct routing is down to the planning and preparations performed, and therefore to achieve that, you need the right team on board. Project sponsors and project management are fundamental to most successful projects, but with a direct routing solution and therefore phone system, it's critical to have the voice and network roles covered when starting to prepare. But since Teams is an integrated UC and collaboration service, you may quickly find that resources from other areas of your business are required. Those voice and network members of the team will be able to start on the initial preparations with assessments on the existing telephony system and network. But it's common that requirements quickly shift towards responsibilities such as desktop, looking at devices and policies, security for end-to-end access, ports and exclusion from VPNs, cloud services for AD and sync, licensing and usage location. Another role within phone system and direct routing projects will be to factor training, adoption and change. Make sure training and knowledge needs are assessed early on and built into the project plan. So having a representative on board within the project team from the start is essential. A lead in this area can be involved in the user profiling and then bring that understanding through into the training plans. It's obvious to train the users of the service, but also consider the technical teams and what they might require to manage the new solution. As with any project, there are high-level stages which are developed into detailed project plan, schedules, and activities. Teams direct routing is no different. Teams is a cloud service and doesn't have the same kind of setup which solutions like Skype for Business Server have, but does still have key planning stages required. It can be tempting to jump straight into turning direct routing on, which doesn't work successfully for complex and multi-region rollouts. Planning should factor elements such as Office 365 health configuration, looking at the namespace, attributes, sync, and user makeup. Network quality and performance is an important area to design closely for teams. Many migrations are from on-premise solutions which use private connectivity, whereas Teams voice can take very different paths depending on the design chosen. Within security, many companies have complex and multi-layered policies. Be prepared for Teams direct routing to be involved in many of those, especially with it being public cloud-based and used by remote and roaming users. A useful mechanism which has significance for all project stages is profiling the users. That process should capture features and functionality used by the business units and roles today, as well as considering how those will change in Teams with the new design. Those user profiles or personas make delivery much easier. You can efficiently target training, perform detailed testing on focused features, and build both deployment and in-life scripts for standard users. The final design should be heavily linked to the activities and results of the planning phase. The assessments and preparations should have defined the goals and objectives for the end solution, and have assessed the end-to-end components which make up the overall service. These are used to define and get agreement on the most effective model of direct routing. A fundamental part of the design is to understand the telephony coverage and placement of SBCs, having a correlation to dial plan, numbering, and integrations. Solutions with single regions may choose fairly straightforward designs and dial plans, but still have the ability to consider either cloud-based direct routing as a service options or on-site solutions. Multi-region and global solutions could factor a hybrid style design, with a mixture of on-site and cloud SBCs to facilitate the required coverage. In most regional solutions, there will be likely more complex regionalized dial plans, voice routing, and emergency services, which need careful consideration. This should be compared against user profiling for factors such as roaming users, compliance, and emergency services calling. Whether the design is single site, multi-region, or global, there's always the need to define the voice media path. This affects provision of network and quality of service, but also capacity and optimization for the SBC. The path's design should be able to predict consistent results based on conclusions and any remediations performed during readiness stages. The design should ensure appropriate mechanisms for migration and potentially coexistence. For instance, migrating from Skype for Business Server solutions to Teams can be done with very little impact to users, but inevitably, when both services are live and in place, flows and interactions need to be considered and thoroughly tested. Teams is much more than direct routing and phone system, and that's immediately apparent when logging into the desktop client for the first time. That can be overwhelming, especially if the business strategy is to move to soft phone, with less reliance on more traditional endpoints and desk phones. In order to help and support your business through a transition, it's important to think about the users of the system as well. The new Teams direct routing solution may offer increased functionality, improved ways of working, and also cost savings. But if the engagement of the users isn't there, then the solution may not be used to its full potential, nor realize some of the objectives. The best way to gain solid adoption of Teams voice is to make the wider business units aware early on within the project, allow users from around the business to understand the high-level objectives and gain an understanding of benefits that it can bring. The user profiling during the planning stages should allow those benefits to be specific to their ways of working. Early adopters and business champions being involved in the project planning, design, and early testing phases can be a good way to have that inclusion stretching beyond the initial IT team. The design phase should have defined and assessed the plan for migration and deployment. There are a number of ways to perform this, including integration with the old solution, coexistence, or brand new greenfield approaches. Since direct routing allows you to utilize your existing number ranges, carriers, and in some cases SBCs, then you may be able to deploy in focused batches, balancing the users across both old and new services at the same time. If there are carrier moves and number porting involved, then it will be well worth completing the initial stages of Teams voice configuration and direct routing to allow pre-port testing on new numbers. Migrations from Skype for Business Server and online OPCH can also be used alongside Teams in carefully planned scenarios. Those types of migrations can involve multiple stages and steps to take users through. Think about scenarios like front of house roles, who may need to be able to transfer calls between both the old and new systems during the same period. Both big bang and stage migrations need prepared and tested scripts with pre-checks to ensure success. Don't get caught out by missing licenses or unplanned propagation delays during the change windows. Bulk changes and uplifts are important and featured in most migrations. However, be sure to pre-validate all the profiles and perform post-checks to ensure everything is applied and working. In some cases, a Teams voice migration with direct routing can lead to shared responsibilities between multiple business units and even involvement from teams who had no prior responsibility towards business telephony. The direct routing design should identify which mechanisms are right for your business from a technical and feature perspective, but also manageability once deployed. Multiple carriers and on-site SBCs can be complex, especially keeping up to date on rapid developments in Office 365 and its impact on the SBC configuration and firmware. Options for direct routing as a service style solutions can be incorporated into your hybrid design to assist in ongoing overhead management or mix and matched across the sites. Some locations might need a greater level of focus and specialized support external to your business, especially if they involve complex compliance. I hope that the first part of the presentation highlights some useful areas to consider when deploying direct routing, and I'll now hand you to my colleague Tara for some advice on connecting your direct routing solution to voice carriers.
Thank you, Alistair. I will just take over the presentation. Here we go. So I'm going to tackle, as Alistair said, the connecting your Microsoft Office 365 to a direct routing carrier for the voice services. So what I've tried to encompass in this slide here are the main considerations that organizations need to think about when they are going to integrate Office 365 with direct routing and the voice element. So first and foremostly, if you are going to be connecting to a direct routing carrier, you need to ensure that they have Microsoft certified SBCs. So there are a few flavors out there. There's the Ribbon, Audio Codes, Cisco, Oracle, just to name a few. It's important that the carrier has one of these because these are the SBCs that have gone through the interop tests with Microsoft. A second consideration is what geographies are your clients in, so the Teams clients or the offices in that you'll need the voice services. So as we all know, Microsoft calling plans are only available in some regions. So you'd have to take that in consideration when you're planning out where you need the voice services. So one of the options, as we're talking about here, is the direct routing element. So bringing in a voice carrier. What you would need to be sure of is that voice carrier can provide full PSTN replacement services. So what do I mean by that? I mean that that carrier can give you the services that the incumbent in that country can give you. That is the emergency services, which Alistair mentioned previously. Also the local dial plan, so dialing the 0800 numbers in that country, premium service, any special services that are available in that country, but also the porting services. So if you do want to migrate your numbers from a current carrier to a direct routing carrier, you need to ensure that they'll support that porting of the numbers. Last but not least, it's a very small point, but I thought I'd mention it because we do see a few customers get caught out by this, is to consider the systems that cannot be migrated to Teams. So the ones that pop to mind are alarm systems, for example, or elevator systems that need analog lines. So just keep them in mind when you're connecting to Teams and direct routing, so you have a plan for them and you're not caught out. So moving on, a question that comes up with direct routing is, do I need an SBC on site to support that? So the answer to that is, if you are connecting to a carrier that has the Microsoft certified SBCs and can provide the full PSTN replacement service, you shouldn't need an SBC. An SBC would be required, for example, if the carrier can't give you a full PSTN replacement service, and they'll need to connect to the local carrier in that country, either via PRI, could be SIP as well, E1, T1, BRI. So in those cases, you will need an SBC on site. Moving to the last consideration that I mentioned in this slide, which is the licensing. So keep in mind that you need an E5 license or an E3 license with the phone system. And if you'd like to bring in parties from outside the organization into conferences, you will need the Microsoft audio conferencing license. So, going off slightly on a tangent here, but I thought it would be worth mentioning this because it's a relatively new feature called media optimization. So this feature allows you to keep the media local. And what I mean by that is it allows you to keep the media between your direct routing provider and your customer site or your office without it having to go to Office 365 over the internet. I feel this is a really interesting feature because it does alleviate some of the security concerns customers have with their voice traveling over the internet. I won't go into the technical details because I'm sure to bore you with that, but just very high level, the way it works is in the Microsoft Teams tenant, you'll configure your clients in a subnet, and you'll basically say clients in this subnet are allowed to use the local connection between the site and the direct routing provider. This will happen, I guess, then after you've configured that, it all happens automatically, but basically it signals a direct routing provider when a call is set up saying, I'm internal, I want to use the local connection, and that automatically allows the media to traverse the link, if you're seeing on the diagram there, between the customer site and, in this case, we're showing the pure IP direct routing SBCs without having to go over the internet. So yeah, a consideration when you're enabling the voice. Okay, this is my last slide. You have everything up and working. What do you need to monitor to make sure the system is healthy and that the voice system is working at the best that it could? So the points that I listed below are not specific to direct routing. So they are monitoring that you can do on any voice system, but I'll run through them just to give you an idea of what you can be looking at to just make sure the voice is working as it should. So the first one there is SIP options, which are the key lives that can be set up between the SBCs and the Microsoft PSTN gateways. So alerts can be received if the connectivity between one of the SBCs and the Microsoft PSTN gateway is down. This shouldn't affect service because there's multiple PSTN gateways. But again, it's good visibility to know there's something not quite right there. Moving on to the second thing you can monitor, which is the utilization, the capacity. Your voice carrier should be able to set up alerts to tell you you're reaching 80% of the capacity on your direct routing link. Moving on to monitoring the quality side of things, there's the MOS score, which tells you the overall health of the call, of the quality of the call. And that comes in values. And you can say, for example, if the call is less than 4.2, which is an MOS score value, send a notification or do something about that call. And I think moving on there on a similar level, looking at the call levels, is the answer to seizure ratio. So basically it tells you what is the percentage of calls that are answered versus those that are not answered. So there's usually a baseline within companies with calling profiles. And if, for example, usually it's 60%, you can set up alerts to say, okay, if less than 60% of the calls are not answered, something might be wrong and it needs to be investigated. So that's another feature that can be monitored with voice. And last is the health of the connectivity. So the packet loss, the jitter, and the post-dial delay. So alerts can be set up to say if you have more than 5% packet loss or your post-dial delay is more than 5-6 seconds to set up a call. Alerts can be set up to give you a more holistic view of what's going on with your voice connectivity and your voice calls. Okay. Okay, so that's all I had for you on the voice side. I do hope I've given you some insights. Would now like to open the floor if there's any questions. I'm on full screen, so I won't be able to see. So I'll just exit that.
So far, there's no questions in the chat. Just maybe give it a second, see if anyone's going to post some.
Doesn't seem so, but what we can do is there is the breakout session there in the chat. If anyone would like to join us after to ask any question, pick our brain, anything you have for Alistair and I will be happy to help.
Okay, thank you, Tara and Alistair. As Tara said, if you'd like to talk with them following the session, you can find them in the session breakout area. So please check the Q&A for the link to join that meeting. And with that, thank you for listening in, and thank you for presenting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.